Robbing a bank's a federal offense. They got me on kidnapping, armed robbery. They're gonna bury me, man.
It came out on Christmas Day, 1973, won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and made Paul Newman and Robert Redford the most bankable duo in Hollywood. The Sting was a con movie in every sense: slick, surprising, and completely unforgettable. But beyond the 2 leading men, there was a remarkable cast of faces that made every scene work. Here's The Sting, the cast then and now in 2026, including faces you're not supposed to remember. Paul Newman, Henry Gondorff. Paul Leonard Newman was born on January 26, 1925, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. His father owned a sporting goods store, and his mother was a homemaker who loved the theater, a detail that would matter given where Paul ended up. He attended Ohio University briefly, served in the United States Navy as a radio operator during World War II in the Pacific Theater, and then enrolled at Kenyon College in Ohio after his discharge, earning his bachelor's degree in theater arts in 1949. He later studied at the Yale School of Drama and trained at the Actors Studio in New York, where he came into contact with the method acting movement at the height of its influence on American performance. His film career began in the mid-1950s, and the early roles were not all promising. His debut in The Silver Chalice in 1954 was so poorly received that Newman later took out a trade paper advertisement apologizing for his performance. But by the early 1960s, he had fully arrived. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in 1958, The Hustler in 1961, HUD in 1963, Cool Hand Luke in 1967. He was nominated for Academy Awards repeatedly during that period, and the nominations kept coming without a win. A running joke in the industry for years that Newman himself was wry about. His first pairing with Robert Redford came in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969, directed by George Roy Hill. The chemistry between them was so natural and so commercially successful that the reunion was essentially inevitable. When Hill brought them back together for The Sting, Newman played Henry Gondorff, a master con man living in quiet, boozy exile, sleeping under the machinery of a merry-go-round, who accepts one last enormous job, partly as a favor to his late friend's protege, and partly, one suspects, because he simply can't say no to a great scheme. Newman played the role with a loose, self-amused authority, the sense of a man who has seen everything and finds it more interesting than troubling. The card game sequence between Gondorff and Lonigan on the train is one of the finest pieces of sustained screen acting in the entire film. Away from the screen, Newman was famously invested in the world beyond Hollywood. He was a serious competitive racing driver, not a celebrity hobbyist, but a genuinely skilled road racer who competed nationally and whose teams won championships. He co-founded Newman's Own, a food company, with his friend A.E. Hotchner in 1982. All post-tax profits and royalties from the company were donated to charity. By the time of his death, those donations had exceeded $500 million. He finally won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Color of Money in 1986, directed by Martin Scorsese. He received an honorary Oscar in 1986 as well, and a Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award in 1994 for his philanthropic work. He was married to actress Joanne Woodward from 1958 until his death, a partnership that was widely described as one of the most stable in Hollywood history, and that lasted 50 years. When asked the secret of his fidelity in a notoriously unfaithful industry, he said simply, "Why go out for hamburger when you have steak at home?" Paul Newman died on September 26, 2008, at his home in Westport, Connecticut. He was 83 years old. The cause was lung cancer. He had kept the nature of his illness largely private in his final year. Robert Redford, Johnny Hooker, Charles Robert Redford Jr. was born on August 18, 1936 in Santa Monica, California. His father was an accountant for Standard Oil. His mother a homemaker who died when Redford was 18, a loss he spoke of throughout his life as formative. He was a scrappy, restless kid who got a partial baseball scholarship to the University of Colorado, lost it due to a drinking problem and spent time drifting through Europe in his early 20s, drawing and painting, before eventually turning toward acting. He studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York and then began working in theater and television in the early 1960s. His film career began to take shape with small television roles and then War Hunt in 1962, but it was Barefoot in the Park in 1967, a Broadway adaptation in which he starred alongside Jane Fonda, that first brought him significant attention. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969 made him a full star. By the time The Sting went into production in 1972, he was one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood, with a particular quality that was hard to define precisely, an ease on screen that looked effortless and wasn't, as Johnny Hooker, a young, broke, sharp con man seeking revenge for his mentor's murder. Redford played someone in motion, someone who hasn't yet settled into the person he'll eventually become. The role required charm, a barely contained recklessness, and the ability to make the audience root for a character who is, at bottom, a professional thief and liar. Redford gave it all of that. He received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for the role. The decade that followed was perhaps the most remarkable in American film acting. The Way We Were, opposite Barbra Streisand in 1973, released the same year as The Sting. The Great Gatsby in 1974, 3 Days of the Condor in 1975, All the President's Men with Dustin Hoffman in 1976, in which Redford played Bob Woodward, one of the Washington Post journalists who broke the Watergate story, making it one of the most significant political films of the decade. The Natural in 1984, each a different kind of performance, none quite like the others. He moved into directing in 1980 with Ordinary People, a family drama about grief and dysfunction that won him the Academy Award for Best Director at the 1981 ceremony. He also received an honorary Lifetime Achievement Oscar in 2002. His commitment to independent cinema led him to found the Sundance Institute in 1981 and to develop what became the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, one of the most important platforms for independent filmmaking in the world. He announced his retirement from acting in 2018 after completing The Old Man and the Gun, in which he played a gentlemanly bank robber opposite Casey Affleck. He then made a cameo in Marvel's Avengers: Endgame in 2019, reprising a brief role from an earlier film in the franchise. His final screen appearance was in the television series Dark Winds, a detective drama set in the Navajo Nation that he co-produced in 2025. Robert Redford died on September 16, 2025, at his home at Sundance in the mountains of Utah. He was 89 years old. His representative issued a brief statement. "He will be missed greatly. The family requests privacy." No cause of death was publicly disclosed. He was surrounded by those he loved in the place he had loved most. Robert Shaw, Doyle Lonigan. Robert Archibald Shaw was born on August 9, 1927, in West Houghton, Lancashire, England. His background was complicated. His father was a physician who suffered from alcoholism and manic depression, and Shaw was 12 years old when his father died by suicide. He won a scholarship, eventually enrolled at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and built his early career with the Royal Shakespeare Company, performing in productions of Macbeth, Cymbeline, Henry VIII, and other Shakespeare plays, including touring Australia with the company in 1949 and 1950. He was also a writer. His novel, The Hiding Place, was published in 1959, and his play, The Man in the Glass Booth, in 1967, a work built around questions of identity and guilt in the aftermath of the Holocaust, was nominated for a Tony Award when it was produced on Broadway. He won the Hawthornden Prize for his novel, The Sun Doctor, in 1962. He said in interviews that he considered himself a novelist who acted to fund his writing, not the other way around. His international film profile grew significantly when he played Red Grant, the platinum-haired assassin who battles Sean Connery's Bond in a cramped Orient Express train compartment in From Russia with Love in 1963. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for playing Henry VIII in Fred Zinnemann's A Man for All Seasons in 1966. Then came The Sting in 1973. As Doyle Lonnegan, the Irish-American crime boss who becomes the Mark and Newman and Redford's elaborate con, Shaw delivered one of the most quietly menacing performances in the film. Lonnegan is a man who has built his entire world on being the predator. He controls everything around him through fear, precision, and a cold understanding of how power works. The horror of the film's scheme is partly in watching someone like that become prey without ever knowing it. Shaw played Lonnegan entirely straight, with a simmering, self-certain authority that made every scene he appeared in feel weighted differently from the rest of the film's breezy confidence. George Roy Hill reportedly said of Shaw that he made the film real, that without a villain who genuinely frightened people, the cleverness of the con would feel weightless. What followed was an extraordinary run of work. The Taking of Pelham, 1, 2, 3 in 1974, Jaws in 1975. As Quint, the scarred, sardonic shark hunter whose monologue about the USS Indianapolis, delivered quietly in a dark cabin aboard the Orca, is one of the most discussed pieces of acting in 1970s American cinema. Robin and Marion in 1976. Black Sunday in 1977. Force 10 from Navarone in 1978. He was working continuously, prolifically, and at a level that matched or exceeded anything around him. Robert Shaw died on August 28, 1978, in Tormakeady, County Mayo, Ireland, where he had made his home. He was 51 years old. He was driving from Castlebar toward his home when he became suddenly ill, stopped the car, stepped out, and collapsed on the roadside of a massive heart attack. He was accompanied by his wife Virginia and his son Thomas. He was rushed to hospital and pronounced dead. He had just finished filming Avalanche Express. He left behind 10 children and a body of work that encompassed acting, novels, and theater, each of it serious, none of it small. Charles Durning, Lieutenant William Snyder. Charles Edward Durning was born on February 28, 1923, in Highland Falls, New York, not far from West Point, where his mother worked as a laundress. He grew up in a large and poor family. He was one of 10 children, several of whom died young, and his early life was one of genuine hardship. Then came the war. Durning was drafted into the United States Army and served with the 1st Infantry Division during World War II. He landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, June 6, 1944, one of the most catastrophically dangerous landings of the entire war, in which soldiers were cut down on the sand before they could even reach cover. He was one of only 3 soldiers in his immediate unit to survive the landing. He was wounded twice during the war and received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and 3 Purple Hearts for his service. He survived a massacre during the Battle of the Bulge, during which he was stabbed multiple times by a German soldier and barely escaped with his life. He almost never spoke about the details in public. There was a long interview he gave toward the end of his life, in which he wept openly while describing it, saying it was something he had never been able to fully leave behind. He carried the weight of what he had survived every day afterward. After the war, he worked in a variety of jobs: ballroom dancing instructor, soda jerk, ditch digger, boxing instructor, before finding his way to acting. He studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York and worked in theater through the 1950s and 1960s before breaking into film. By the time he appeared in The Sting as Lieutenant Snyder, the corrupt police detective running his own extortion scheme against Hooker, he was in his early 50s and had built the kind of character actor's resume that suggested he could play anything and make it work. The career that followed. The Sting was extraordinary in its range and longevity. Dog Day Afternoon in 1975, opposite Al Pacino. The Muppet Movie in 1979. True Confessions in 1981. Tootsie in 1982, for which he received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor playing the theater director pursuing Dustin Hoffman's cross-dressing character. Dick Tracy in 1990. The Coen Brothers' Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? In 2000, at age 77, playing the governor in a sequence that requires physical comedy and a broad Southern delivery, and pulling it off brilliantly. He appeared in over 200 films and television productions across a career that stretched more than 50 years. Charles Durning died on December 24, 2012, in New York City. He was 89 years old. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Eileen Brennan, Billy. Eileen Brennan was born, Verla, Eileen Regina Brennan, on September 3, 1932, in Los Angeles, California. She studied at Georgetown University and the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and built her early career in theater in New York. She had a celebrated off-Broadway run in Little Mary Sunshine in 1959 that ran for 1,143 performances and established her as a performer with real comic range. She became a regular on the television series Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In the late 1960s, where her quick timing and expressive delivery gave her significant national exposure. Her film work in the early 1970s established her as one of the most distinctive supporting presences in American cinema. She appeared in Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show in 1971 as Genevieve, a warm-hearted waitress navigating a life in a dying small Texas town, a role that earned her a BAFTA nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She appeared in Scarecrow in 1973, alongside Al Pacino and Gene Hackman. Then came The Sting, where she played Billy, the brothel madame and Gondorf's closest ally. The role required her to bring warmth and sharpness to a character who existed largely in the background of the scheme while being fully present as a person. She did exactly that. She received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for Private Benjamin in 1980, opposite Goldie Hawn, playing the blunt and initially terrifying army captain who ends up being the most transformative figure in the film. She won a Golden Globe and a Primetime Emmy for reprising the role in the television series. In 1982, she was struck by a car and suffered severe injuries that required years of recovery and multiple surgeries. The accident took real momentum from her career at a time when she was at her most prominent. She returned to film and television, appearing in Clue in 1985 as Mrs. Peacock, in Jeepers Creepers in 2001, and in Miss Congeniality 2 in 2005. Eileen Brennan died on July 28, 2013, at her home in Burbank, California. She was 80 years old. The cause was bladder cancer. Ray Walston, J.J. Singleton. Ray Walston was born Herman Ray Walston on November 2, 1914, in Laurel, Mississippi. He came to acting through an unlikely route. His family moved to Houston, Texas, where his father wanted him to learn the oil business. Walston joined a traveling repertory company instead, selling tickets and taking small roles, before eventually working his way to New York in 1945. He spent years building a reputation in theater, working alongside director George Abbott across 5 productions over 2 decades. He won a Tony Award for Best Actor in a Musical in 1956 for his performance as Mr. Applegate, the devil himself, in Damn Yankees, and he reprised the role on screen in 1958. He became a genuine household name in 1963 as the extraterrestrial Uncle Martin in the television series My Favorite Martian, which ran for 3 years. In The Sting, he played J.J. Singleton, one of the experienced con men recruited to staff Gondorf's elaborate fake wire service. The role was part of a long and varied film career that also included The Apartment with Jack Lemmon in 1960, Paint Your Wagon in 1969, Popeye in 1980, Fast Times at Ridgemont High in 1982, and a two-time Emmy Award-winning role in the long-running drama series Picket Fences in the 1990s. Ray Walston died on January 1st, 2001 in Beverly Hills, California. He was 86 years old. The cause was lupus, a chronic autoimmune condition he had been living with for years. Harold Gould, Kid Twist. Harold Gould was born Harold Vernon Goldstein on December 10, 1923, in Schenectady, New York. He was valedictorian of his high school class, enrolled at Albany Teachers College to become a social studies teacher, enlisted in the United States Army during World War II, and returned from the war to pursue a doctorate in theater at Cornell University, becoming, in short, one of the most formally educated actors in Hollywood. He spent years teaching theater at UCLA before transitioning fully into a professional acting career in his 40s. In The Sting, he played Kid Twist, one of the old-school operators brought into the con, a character whose very presence suggested a lifetime of accumulated street knowledge. Gould played that kind of elegant, world-weary authority naturally, and the role fit him well. He became a fixture on American television, appearing in Rhoda as Martin Morgenstern from 1974 to 1978, and most memorably as Miles Weber, Rose's boyfriend, in The Golden Girls from 1985 to 1992. He was a 5-time Emmy Award nominee and appeared in more than 300 television shows, 20 major films, and over 100 stage productions across a career of more than 50 years. Harold Gould died on September 11, 2010, in Woodland Hills, California. He was 86 years old. Robert Earl Jones, Luther Coleman. Robert Earl Jones was born on February 3, 1910, in Senatobia, Mississippi. He grew up as a sharecropper's son, dropped out of school in the 3rd grade, worked the land as a young man, and eventually made his way north as part of the Great Migration, first to Chicago and then to New York City, where he became part of the vibrant Black artistic community that had grown out of the Harlem Renaissance. The poet Langston Hughes gave him one of his earliest acting opportunities at the Harlem Suitcase Theater in Harlem. He was also a trained boxer who had once sparred with world heavyweight champion Joe Louis in 1937. His career was interrupted and nearly destroyed in the early 1950s when he was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, the congressional body investigating alleged communist influence in American entertainment and the arts. He refused to testify and was blacklisted, effectively shut out of the film and television industry for years because of a political position he held and would not abandon. The blacklist affected hundreds of people in Hollywood during that period, but it fell particularly hard on Black artists whose professional networks were already more limited to begin with. He eventually returned to working, building a career in theater, film, and television that extended into the 1990s. His stage credits included Broadway productions across 5 decades. In The Sting, he played Luther Coleman, Hooker's older mentor, who was murdered early in the film, setting the entire story in motion. The role was modest in screen time, but emotionally essential to everything that followed. Later, notable film roles included Witness in 1985 alongside Harrison Ford. Robert Earl Jones was the father of James Earl Jones, one of the most celebrated voices in the history of American entertainment, the voice of Darth Vader in the Star Wars films and Mufasa in The Lion King. James Earl Jones, who had a complicated and at times estranged relationship with his father, spoke in later years about the process of reconciliation and about what it meant to share a profession with a man who had endured so much for the right to practice it. James Earl Jones himself died in September 2024 at the age of 93. Robert Earl Jones died on September 7, 2006, at the Lillian Booth Actors Home in Inglewood, New Jersey. He was 96 years old. George Roy Hill, director. George Roy Hill was born on December 20th, 1921 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, into a well-off newspaper family. He studied music at Yale, where he was an accomplished musician, earned his degree in 1943, and then served as a transport pilot for the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II, flying missions in both the Pacific and Atlantic theaters. After the war, he attended Trinity College in Dublin on the GI Bill, began acting in theatrical productions in Ireland, returned to the United States, worked extensively in television drama in the 1950s, including directing A Night to Remember for Kraft Television Theater in 1956, and eventually moved into directing feature films. He worked across genres with a flexibility that was unusual. Hawaii in 1966, Thoroughly Modern Millie in 1967, the wrenching Kurt Vonnegut adaptation Slaughterhouse-Five in 1972, before Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969 established him as a director with an instinct for combining genuine warmth, wit, and emotional weight in ways that appealed to very large audiences. The Sting won him the Academy Award for Best Director in 1974. The film received 10 nominations total and won 7, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay for David S. Ward. Hill was also an accomplished pilot who flew his own plane throughout his life, and he retained his pilot's license well into old age. His relationship with Newman and Redford was genuinely collaborative, built on trust, established over 2 films, and a shared sensibility about what kind of movies they wanted to make. Later films included Slapshot in 1977, A Little Romance in 1979, and The World, according to Garp in 1982, the adaptation of John Irving's novel starring Robin Williams. He was, by all accounts, a private man who measured success by the quality of the work, not the number of column inches written about it. George Roy Hill died on December 27, 2002 in New York City. He was 81 years old. The cause was complications from Parkinson's disease. He died just 1 week after his own birthday. The Sting opened on Christmas Day, 1973, 7 Oscars from 10 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director for George Roy Hill, and Best Original Screenplay for David S. Ward. The screenplay was Ward's first produced film credit. He was 26 years old when he began writing it. At the ceremony, Hill gave a brief piece of advice to the audience of fellow directors. Hire the same people you hired before. The film's production design, by Henry Bumstead, recreated a Depression-era Chicago with a richness of detail that made the world of the con feel genuinely lived in. The costumes by Edith Head, the most decorated costume designer in Oscar history, with 8 wins, captured the period with precision and helped tell the story of who each character was before a single line was spoken. The score, adapted from Scott Joplin's ragtime compositions, supervised by Marvin Hamlish, won the Oscar for Best Original Scoring Adaptation and introduced Joplin's music to a new generation of listeners, half a century after the ragtime era had passed. Looking at this cast in 2026, it is hard to miss the weight of what time does. Paul Newman and Robert Redford, the 2 men whose faces were on every poster and whose names define the film for most of its audience, are both gone now. Newman in 2008 at 83, Redford in September 2025 at 89. Robert Shaw was gone before many of the people who love this film were old enough to see it, taken at 51 by a heart attack in the west of Ireland. Charles Durning, who survived Omaha Beach to build one of the longest careers in American character acting, died in 2012. Eileen Brennan in 2013, Ray Walston on New Year's Day 2001, Harold Gould in 2010, Robert Earl Jones, who lived to 96, died in 2006, George Roy Hill, who built the whole thing, In 2002, What They All Left Behind is the film. Still watchable, still surprising on repeated viewing, still the kind of picture that makes you feel like you've been in on something. These were the faces of The Sting, then, in 1973, and now, in 2026. If this kind of film history is what brings you here, hit that like button and subscribe. There's a lot more to explore, and we'll see you for the next one.